Welcome to The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. Since 1996, this organization has been investing in the next generation of African American leaders. And this podcast highlights the stories of the people that make this program special. I'm your host, Ray Pryor, 2015 Ron Brown Scholar. And in this episode, we're sharing a live recording of a fireside chat from this year's selection weekend in Washington, D.C. It'll start with an introduction by Miles Johnson, a 2004 Ron Brown Scholar who served as the host for the Celebration of Excellence dinner, who will introduce the chat moderator, McMahan, who will ultimately introduce Will Tarpeh, the program's first MacArthur Genius Fellow.
I am beyond excited for what is about to come next, a fireside chat that's going to move us from potential to real-world impact. And so to kick things off, I'd like to introduce Dr. McMahan from the RBS class of 1999. So Ku is a recognized expert in science and technology policy, particularly where it intersects with agriculture and water. He's a global leader who's managed over $250 million in grant funding to tackle critical issues around the world. He got his doctorate from UNC. Woo! And then he went on to work on major projects like the USAID West Africa Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene Program. He later joined Securing Water for Food, where his work supported more than 6 million farmers and families, and contributed to the production of over 3.5 million tons of food. That is pretty incredible. Most recently, Ku served as the Deputy Managing Director at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, where he helped to oversee their technical assistance portfolio. Ku's experience working across more than 80 countries from Latin America to Asia makes him one of the absolute best minds that we have to lead this conversation about impact. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. McMahan.
And good evening, everybody. It's great to see you all. It's a pleasure to be able to lead this fireside chat with Will, because we've kind of crossed paths back and forth across time. And Will and I were talking a couple of weeks ago. I was like, oh yeah, I remember I was kind of watching you kind of move along. And I was like, oh, okay, I can do something now, because Ku's already done something like that. So this will be a bit long because, we're talking about a genius here. So bear with me. As an assistant professor of chemical engineering at Stanford University, Dr. William Tarpeh is reimagining waste as a powerful resource. His work centers on developing sustainable technologies that transform discarded materials into clean water, fertilizers, and energy. And as we all have seen with the Iran war, these things are really present right now. Advancing solutions that sit at the intersection of environmental engineering, chemistry, and social impact. Through this approach, his research not only pushes scientific boundaries, but also addresses pressing challenges of equity and access. Today, William is focused on bringing these innovations to scale, particularly in communities with limited infrastructure. A pilot project in Kenya successfully produced urine-derived fertilizers at a lower cost than synthetic alternatives. Closer to home, he and his colleagues are preparing to test an electrocatalyst in a box system in California farm fields using agricultural runoff. If successful, this technology could significantly reduce nitrate pollution, which is responsible for harmful algal blooms, and will also generate sustainable, affordable sources of fertilizer. As waste from human, agricultural, and industrial activities continue to grow, William's work plays a vital role in protecting environmental and public health while sustainably producing chemicals that modern life depends on. William's journey reflects the very mission of the Ron Brown Scholar Program, to support brilliant minds who lead with purpose and service. From his undergraduate days at Stanford to his PhD at UC Berkeley, and now as a leading researcher and mentor, William has embodied the spirit of excellence and community to uplift and define our scholar network.
Wastewater contains two things: water and stuff we don't want, waste. Some of that waste can be really useful. I am envisioning scalable solutions to wastewater treatment and recovering valuable mineral resources. My name is William Tarpeh, and I am a chemical engineer. If you look at the same chemical in one setting, you call it a pollutant. In another setting, you call it a product. Give me a pollutant in wastewater that you want to get rid of, and then hopefully we can find a product that we could make from that pollutant just by resituating it. Our main vision is something that we call electrochemical wastewater refining. An oil and gas refinery takes crude oil from the ground and it turns it into many, many different products. In our lab, we're trying to do a similar thing, but with wastewater as our crude feedstock. And our efforts are really divided into a few areas. One is electrocatalysis, and so that's doing reactions driven by electricity. And another is electrochemical separations, which is using electricity to drive ions through selective filters. So we could say separate lithium from nickel or nickel from cobalt. And we design electrochemical reactors that allow us to convert something like nitrate pollutants into ammonia products. Ammonia is a primary fertilizer ingredient that arguably feeds over half the world. Some of our work has been focusing on that energy efficient and low emissions and hopefully cost effective refining of wastewater into valuable products on a household or building or neighborhood or village or small town scale. One of the things we envision is this closed loop. Right now, we take things from the environment, we make products, and then we discharge them back into the environment. A closed loop would say we periodically take things from the environment, we use them as many times as possible, and then we discharge as little as possible to the environment. But if we can get to a future where the concept of wastewater is just obsolete.
That was really sciencey. And as a scientist, I was excited listening to it. But for others in the room who aren't scientists, how would you describe your work?
Great question. Great to be with you all today. How I describe my work most of the time, it's like recycling, but for water. So if you think about recycling, most of us are used to thinking about separating like paper from cardboard from plastics, right? Or someone does it for you, maybe if you put it all together. I do the same thing, but for water, right? It's if we separate things, it becomes easier to get them back out later, right? If you have a mixed stream of plastic, paper, cardboard, someone at some point has to separate it out. Think the same thing, but for molecules in water that are even harder to separate. So we take something that we don't want in water, something that we use all the time, and we try to connect the dots between us.
Okay. And so a much more important question. How would you describe yourself? What makes Will, Will? And can you talk about your early life and how that helped shape you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I've always been very curious and very like tinkering on my own. So as a kid, I was really into paleontology. I was like a 5-year-old. That was like, okay, I'm also not like your average kid.
I love this.
But I love like dinosaur digs and the concept of fossils and stuff telling us. So I went to a museum until I was 5. I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, and I went to the Peabody Museum for those who have been to New Haven. I went every Saturday, and I asked my mom like around when I was in college. I said, "Mom, did the exhibits change every week?" And she said, "Absolutely not. It was so boring." But that's to say, once I get hooked on something, I'm just fascinated by it, and I'll think about it for a really long time. And so some of those things are like I would like do fake dinosaur digs on my own. Once I latch onto something, I just get really excited about it, and I lose track of time. And so those are some of the things about me. I think early on I was allowed to explore. My mom really cultivated that in me. I think also I have a strong sense of self, I suppose, also because my mom really cultivated in me the freedom of choice, like choosing what I wanted to major in or choosing what activities I want to do or things like that. So I think so much of being an academic and doing things that seem innovative, but the same things that people are saying like, oh, that's so innovative now. Like when I was a PhD student, they were like, that's weird. And so there's something about like sticking with something because it was exciting to me, by virtue of it just being interesting to me, that captures a little bit of my spirit.
So this is a question I didn't throw on your list, but I'm going to ask it anyways. So how has your life changed, if at all, since being named a genius, even though you're doing all the things you were doing before?
Sure. So a funny thing about it is the MacArthur Award is one where you don't know you're nominated. So like I got a call one day and was told, hey, you're a MacArthur Fellow. And I got really silent, and I don't know, I kind of blacked out a little bit. And then the guy who called me was like, are you still there? I was like, yeah, sorry. And he's like, good, because I have like 11 other people on this Zoom call to congratulate you. I was like, okay, yeah, really almost lost the award, maybe. Okay. But so after that month of like kind of stressful secrecy, like this video was taped in that month, right? And so I couldn't tell my students what I was like, we're just going to shoot it. Some people are going to come and shoot a video. And then they saw, and they were that. So there's some trust issues there. But I think since the announcement, I think, it's basically brought recognition to the work, and not just to my work, but to the whole field of wastewater treatment, which is in many ways one of my goals, right? It's to take something that feels invisible to us. Most of us, I don't want to speak for you, but you probably don't think as much as I do about what happens after you flush the toilet or what happens to wastewater that's going under us. But it makes it a little bit more visible. I've also gotten much more aware. I'm not like a big podcaster, but I've been on some podcasts now, and I'm like, oh wow, there's a whole universe of people who listen to podcasts all the time. But it's made me think and talk about my work in more universal terms, I think, and has given me some time to think about, hey, what do I actually want to do out of all of this? I'm usually like very focused on this project and that project, but it helps me knit things together in some new ways.
So who were some of your mentors and how did they influence you?
Yeah, I think I've had several mentors throughout my educational journey. Some of them were like my elementary school teachers who helped me kind of come out of my shell. I was a really shy kid for most of my life. Some of them really advocated for me. There was a time when I was going to middle school, and I was taking a test to take algebra early because that was like one of my biggest aspirations in middle school. Promise I'm normal. Maybe we'll get to that. But I remember that I think I had erased, it was like a Scantron. The finalists, do you guys know what a Scantron form is?
No, that may be we're a bit old. So.
Yeah, back in the day, we took tests on paper and pencil, and we did bubbles. We used the number 2 pencil. But if you erased, it could not scan well, right? And so next thing I knew, a couple of my teachers were like, there's no way he didn't ace that exam. And they like really went to bat for me. And next thing I knew, I was like talking to the superintendent to be able to retake the test. And these 2 mentors of mine were just like, he belongs in this class. And I took the test again, scored very well on it, and found out later that like lots of people who were not Black were allowed to take the test multiple times. But that to say, these mentors were so important in helping me get over these structural barriers that I didn't know. Later in life, I had mentors who encouraged me to apply to graduate school. They had heard me say something like, maybe I want to do research, and and they reminded me again of that identity. So I think so much of mentors, and I think of my role as a mentor now, as like reminding people who they are. And I think of that as and who maybe the dreams they blurted out, but they were like, oh no, that seems too scary. Reminding people what they're capable of. So that's what my mentors have done for me.
So one of the young folks at the table asked me this question, so I'll ask you, how did you choose your mentors? How did you find them? Like, what did you look for?
Good question. I think I looked for people who seemed to take a little extra time with those around them. I think especially for me even in undergrad, I wasn't like necessarily like a go-getter. It took me some time to warm up. So if someone seemed to take a little extra care with how they asked questions or made sure we didn't have questions, those are the people who I felt safe enough with, or people who I saw advocate for other students, or people who seemed to empathize well. And I think those are some of the things I looked for. But I think so importantly, many of my mentors didn't share any of my life experience, and that's just can be a reality, right? But if there was something that resonated or rhymed, so someone recently asked me about my like PhD and postdoc mentors, and even my undergrad research mentors, and it was only when they asked me that I realized I'd been trained by only women my entire scientific career, and not by, which is amazing, yes, and is unusual, sadly, but something about that clicked for me and made sense. Some of our experiences rhymed, right? It was like I could empathize with them, they could empathize with me, and that made me feel like they were looking out for me.
Let's talk about struggle. Every Ron Brown scholar had to go through it to get where they are, whether it's, early in their career or later on. Talk about some of your struggles, and just to help some of the younger scholars understand how to get over it.
Yeah, for sure. I remember visit weekend, and it's our selection weekend, sorry. I did it in 2008. And was an extraordinary experience, and it was also an extremely scary experience.
Yes, I remember that as well.
I'm trying to decide what to say without scaring you. Let's just say the interviews really made me reflect. The interview questions really made me reflect. I was like, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think that helped me. It helped me in some ways. It challenged me in some really great ways. I think other ways that struggle took place, I mentioned sort of like this structural barrier of like taking algebra in 6th grade. But in my high school, I went to high school in the DC area in Northern Virginia. I was one of very, very few Black students. And that was something, and I mean, that's maybe something that resonates with some of you in the room, but it was a very high achieving school. It was a magnet school that people tested to get into. And I think that was where I really realized that I was seen differently, not like just by nature of being me and showing up in a room. And even people I thought were friends were like, when I got in December, they were like, well, how did you do that? I don't know, I studied. And that's a strange question to ask. Or like, how did you get that scholarship? Or yeah, so those types of struggles where people question whether I belonged. And that's been something that I'm really grateful to my mom and my mentors outside of school who constantly told me, you belong, you belong, you belong. Any room you walk into, you already belong. And so I think that struggle came with this foundation and fortress that was built up inside of me that made me able to do those things and to persist. And that kept happening as I went on to graduate school and all of these other things. And everyone encounters doubt and feeling like an imposter. But I think especially as Black students, there are specific challenges that are somewhat universal, the hypervisibility, but the invisibility at the same time, some of these things. And I think throughout it all, I just tried to remember who I was and where I was going. And that's something my mom always said to me. She said, never forget where you came from and never forget where you're going. And so that's been the thing I often come back to. I think I was actually, speaking of selection weekend, I was actually supposed to ask our AV team to pull up some photos of us.
Yeah, we got a little too into the conversation.
Yeah, we did. I got locked in on Ku. So maybe we can see some of the then and now photos of Ku and me. They didn't show us these, so I'll take a breath. Let's show Ku first. Oh, come on now. Come on now. Wow. Come on, 90s. Okay, sorry. That was unedited. Oh, wow. Yeah, now I'm serious. So we actually, there's more.
Yeah, we get a whole group of them.
And I just get to talk over them. This is great. Keep it up. Oh, wow. Look at this. Okay, so we'll let those keep going. But one of the reasons we wanted to do this, especially for the finalists, was just so that you all could realize we were like you. We were sitting at these tables wondering who these very esteemed people were. There's Carmel, the icon.
There she is.
Just to be clear, this is Carmel. This is Carmel. This is Carmel. There she is. This is Carmel T. Norris. Okay, yeah, they should stop me. Okay, we should keep going with questions. We really did want you to show, so the 20 finalists in the room, this is us, right? We were like you at age 17, 18, didn't know what we would want to do, who we'd want to be, but we connected with people in this room. Mm-hmm. And that's really what helped inspire us. And the same people who were scary to us became people who helped us along the way. So that was a quick aside, but here you get some. Oh, come on now. Oh, good. We ended just in time.
Perfect timing.
So hope we enjoyed that. Yeah, nice.
So I get to be a science nerd for a little bit.
Yes.
So what first drew you to environmental engineering, specifically to water and sanitation?
I think when I was in high school, I really loved chemistry and I really loved math. And I thought about using those tools to solve really big problems. And by big problems, I mean, I got introduced to this was around, I was in high school from 2004 to 2008. So we were talking about things like globalization and what does it mean to grow up in different places. Actually, it resonates with what Florence was talking about with life chances, right? It's where someone is born and determine how likely they are to die of diarrheal disease before they turn age 5, right? And these are things that seem like flips of the coin. But I think I started to think what if it weren't that way? And what does science have to do with it not being that way? That was when I started asking those questions. So those are the big questions that have interested me. I got interested in water because it's so fundamental to everything we do. It's something that here in the US, most of us take for granted, right? You turn on a tap, water appears. You usually trust that water's clean, or you go to the store and buy bottled water or whatever. But there are millions of people around the world for whom their next drink is not a guarantee, right? And same thing, we don't have to get into the details you just ate, but same thing for toilets, right? We might think oh man, I have to find a bathroom and I'm in the middle of New York City. How do I do that, right? But that's a reality for people every day. They don't have a clean place to go to the bathroom. And we're talking billions of people, 40% of the world's population. So those stats, those stuck with me. So some of my mentors at the time said the stats that bother you, sometimes that can point you towards what you want to work on. So trying to tie science and these big impact questions is where I started. And then throughout college, I just sort of tried to make those things mesh together. And at times it was awkward and clunky. And at times it made a lot of sense. But I think throughout those things, that's what you see in my work to this day. But those seeds were planted a long time ago.
And this kind of ties in. Was there a particular moment or experience that made you realize this was the problem you wanted to spend a good amount of your life trying to solve?
Yeah, I think I took at Stanford, we call them introductory seminars. So it was a class for freshmen and sophomores, but it's intentionally small and it's intentionally not intro to X or whatever. And I met this professor and the class was called Water Engineering and Public Health. And I'm sure we did a lot of great stuff in that class, but I don't remember what we did. My main takeaway was, wow, you can study this for your whole life. That was my takeaway. And then I just was oh, I can do that. Let's do that. And so it sounds really easy, but the moment you see what's possible, it all clicks for you, which again ties into some of Florence's points. I had not met someone who had committed their life to these problems. A point where I realized it was still what I wanted to do was when I was a PhD student, and I was, again, I'll spare you the details, but let's just say I was mixing waste together. Okay.
I had my waste years too.
Yeah, I was mixing it
Eczema under the
with some, let's say, with like a kitchen appliance, to keep it broad, right? And like it went everywhere,
oh boy.
including on me. And I thought to myself, this is the moment you can leave. This is
the
the door. I can just walk out the door and
walk
not
out
come
the door.
back. And I thought, no, I still want to be here. This is gross. Let me be clear. This is gross, but I still want to do it.
And this one actually goes to what we were just talking about before we came on the stage. How do you balance designing solutions that are both technologically advanced and accessible to communities with limited infrastructure? More particularly, how do you make sure you don't design something that people don't actually want to use?
Right on. Yeah. This is the dichotomy of like cost or technological advancement, so to speak, with like utility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so often a thing I tell my students is actually, it ties into like how we do any type of design. We prototype it, and we don't start with the answer we think in our mind. We have to be flexible and open-handed. So like earlier this week, like I just got back from Mexico yesterday. We were doing some field work there with the community. And most of our discussions were like, hey, here's this technology we have. Here's what it does. What do you think you would want to use it for, if at all, right? And being open to changing direction and taking the long way around the block, as it were, is where I think we get the best solutions. It's slower, it's more methodical, it's circular at times, but I think that's where you get to what's actually useful. Concretely, in this case, it means like, oh, having pumps that are gravity driven could save a lot of money and could make this worthwhile. Or like having a solar panel that provides energy to run this wastewater treatment process, but hey, helps them charge their phones too.
There you go.
That's worthwhile. And so these things that wouldn't occur to us. And so I really return to this idea that like, there's a lot of ways to have expertise, right? You can have scientific expertise, but there's also just like lived experience expertise, right? When I go to rural Mexico, there's huge expertise gaps for me that I don't have that the community can fill in.
I mean, you're like writing my next question. It's like magic. What have you learned from working in different global contexts about how culture and local knowledge shape successful engineering solutions?
Yeah, I think there's so many assumptions. Like culture in many ways is about how we see the world, which is indeed tied into the assumptions we make and the perceptions we have. So like some of the things when it comes to like toilet use is like, do people like where in a household should the toilet be, right? What should it look like? Should it be a place where people sit or squat? Is it a place where people, again, to spare you, is it a place where they wipe or they wash, right? There are all these questions that need to lay down your assumptions and realize that no matter what, we all have cultural assumptions and how we approach the world. That's a really hard thing to do. Once you start to do that, I think what I end up seeing is like, there's also a lot of commonality, right? Like people want dignity, right? Sometimes what a toilet means is dignity, or it means safety, or it means all of these things to all of us, right? It's a place for privacy. There are some universal things, but they look different. The instantiations of them look different.
So how can cities rethink wastewater systems to not just treat waste, but turn it into a resource? Literally shit in the gold.
Love that. This is something that's fascinating to me, because we also, in the work I do, there's another dichotomy that can pop up, which is like high income countries have it all together and we have the best water and wastewater treatment, and like low income countries don't. And there's many concepts like the leapfrog, where we think like, okay, the main example of that is like landline versus cell phones, right? And I think that's absolutely something to learn from. But there's maybe, for me at least, there's more to the story. I think like part of the reason I did my work in Kenya as a PhD student was because there was like thousands of liters of urine collected, which was not easy to get in California. There's like something I needed that was there, not that I didn't have. And that was because there was a company building new toilets that were safe and clean. And so I had scientific opportunities there that I did not have in California at the time. And so I think there's so much to be said for like the like localness of water and wastewater, that we can have all these different like labs of how we do things, right? In California, we're big on like desalinating water and trying to use ocean water, desalinating wastewater, because we face droughts all the time. And we can learn from that. Here on the East Coast, water is a little more plentiful, right?
Yeah.
But there are water quality issues, right? Ammonia or nitrate causing Chesapeake Bay algal bloom. So these different problems are local, but they get connected, right? And so basically, I love to think about partnering with different communities and testing out some of our hypotheses, and then trying to connect the dots and say, okay, we learned this from place A.
how can it help us in place B?
So what breakthroughs or shifts do you think are most needed in the next decade to address global water insecurity?
Hmm. Yeah, I think for me, some of the things I spent a lot of time thinking about are how to make water treatment as energy efficient as possible. So one of the things we've done in my lab recently that actually we were just starting to test out in Mexico is we use electricity to drive the purification of ammonia, which is, you heard about in the video, is a common fertilizer component from wastewater. And that's really great, but one of the things we've done to decrease the energy, the electricity you need to use, is connected it with a solar panel. Solar panels, I'll nerd out for just a second, but solar panels they're very efficient, but when they get too hot, they stop being as efficient. In our process, it's water and we're trying to get gas out of water. And so if you heat it up, it goes faster. You see, if we connect these two things, if we pass water on the back of the solar panel, it cools the solar panel and keeps it more efficient, right? And then it heats up our water and makes our process go faster. That type of innovation is that's to me what we're looking for. Where's the double win, right? And of course, there's still lots to figure out here, but that's what I mean by like, if the solar panel can produce even additional energy, then someone sees it as like, oh, this is like an energy provision thing that happens to have a toilet on the back of it, right? It's like, how do we get these things? I know it sounds crazy, but we're doing it. So, but how do we get these things to be like multiple wins in multiple categories? Those are some of the breakthroughs I think we need. I think something that's been really exciting in the water space, like when I went to my PhD, there weren't so many people in like chemical engineering thinking about water. Over the past decade or so, it's been really exciting to see people see water as like an applied field, but one where like basic science can do something, right? And so that's been a shift just in my short career that I've been really, really excited to see. I meet more and more students who are like, I study this like very niche molecule, but I'm interested in water treatment. And I'm like, perfect. Then now there are places for those students to go and be trained and all of these other things.
I want you to talk a little bit more about the need for fertilizer. I remember
sure.
during the Ukraine war, a lot
Yeah.
of the farmers I was working with in Africa and the companies there were suffering because they just didn't have access to fertilizer because a lot of it came from Ukraine.
Mhm.
And so kind of the cost plus the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So briefly, fertilizer, of course, is how we grow a lot of crops around the world. But again, this came up in the video, but the process by which we produce ammonia fertilizers or nitrogen-based fertilizers won 2 Nobel Prizes in the 20th century. Okay, it's called the Haber-Bosch process. Each of them won a separate Nobel Prize it's a double Nobel Prize winning process. It's the most invisible process that is most important to a lot of us, right? To like human society. Estimates are that like in all of our bodies, the nitrogen in all of our bodies, like half of it comes from this process. That's like, it's literally keeping us alive, right? So these facilities, there are only about like 400 of them around the world to feed like 8-9 billion people, right? And so that means that when these supply chains get disrupted, whether it's in Ukraine or Iran, there's been recent news articles about that as well. It means people become more vulnerable, and the most vulnerable become even more vulnerable. And so these big supply chains, one of the biggest benefits of our type of approach is like, if we can use water as a feedstock or as a source of things, like the biggest benefit of our approach in Kenya was that it was a locally produced fertilizer. Like that was what got people excited. I mean, I was honest and told them, what if it also came from urine? And they're like, okay, I'm a little less excited maybe.
Yeah.
But the big benefit was that it was locally produced. It means it didn't have to cross oceans. It didn't have markups as it changed hands. It meant that communities could take some agency back, because wherever there are people, there's urine. And if there's ammonia in that urine, which there always is, then we can pull that out and have locally produced fertilizer. So I think another innovation is like seeing water as a source of things, and not just of water, but of the other minority components that are involved in the water.
So as a Black scientist in engineering, how, if at all, has your identity shaped your perspective on the problems you choose to work on?
Yeah, I think going back to my interest in the space. So I grew up with just my mom. My mom is American. She grew up in New Haven. My dad is Liberian. And so I think a lot of things that made me think were like, oh, if I'd grown up on the other side of my family, I would have had a different set, again, to reference Florence here, of life chances, right? And so that has brought it home for me in some core ways. It's also meant that for me, so I minored in African studies because I was fascinated about how to solve these big problems that would like help the bottom quintile, right? And this huge growing population in sub-Saharan Africa in particular. I think what being Black has done for me is it's honestly allowed me some like entry and credibility into communities where my colleagues have struggled. So an example of that is we've done some work in Alabama, in Lowndes County, which is a predominantly Black community that's between Montgomery and Selma, Alabama. And they have a lot of failing septic tanks. So septic tanks is when you're like not connected to a wastewater treatment plant. And they have had issues with this for years and years and years. And so
one of the main like founders of the movement for sanitation in Lowndes County. Her name's Catherine Coleman Flowers. She's actually also a MacArthur Fellow, year of 2020. And she came to Stanford and gave a talk, and I just like cold emailed her and was like, I would love to talk more about this. And me and another one of my colleagues who's also Black talked to her. And she literally said, I'm very interested in this because I think you all can do this in a way that's different. And so that I did not take lightly at all. And we've like walked through that collaboration for the past like 5 years, quite methodically and intentionally. And it's allowed us to connect with the community in different ways. Yeah. And I think as I work in under-resourced or overlooked communities, some of that again resonates with my own experience of being in academia and thinking of times where someone didn't quite listen to what I was saying, or someone didn't quite take the time to make sure I felt like I belonged. Yeah.
So what advice would you give to students who want to work at the intersection of engineering, sustainability, and social impact?
I think keep going. For a while, I thought their ends wouldn't connect. I was like, I don't know how to make them connect. But I think I kept my eyes out for opportunities that seemed like they might connect. I also a lot of it was thanks to Ron Brown. In undergrad, my internships were like pretty disparate. I worked at an Institute of Virology. I worked at this makes sense now, but at the time was kind of confusing to people. I worked at a toilet company in Mexico. Explain that to your parents. Anyway, I turned down a job at ExxonMobil for that. So, yeah, anyway. Okay, and then I worked at a healthcare diagnostics company. But each of those, I kind of had the confidence to try something out. And for me, maybe this resonates, maybe it doesn't. But as a scientist, it felt at that age, and still feels to me, okay to test things out, test the hypothesis out. And whether the result was, yes, I love that, or no, I hate that, it was still good hypotheses are useful as proven or disproven. So yeah, just keep searching and like keep asking questions.
Last question from me. How would you mentor a young person who doesn't recognize their own brilliance?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I would, I guess it's not so conditional. This happens to me a fair amount. I just try to remind them who they are and what I see in them. And that's what people have done for me, as you've heard from my story. And that's something I try to pass on. In academia, it's really interesting because I found that when I give my students compliments, sometimes they're confused. And that hurts my heart a bit, because I'm like, wow, no one has ever complimented your work. And so I just try to see the value in what they're doing and continuously remind them of what they can do, what I think they can do, and try to celebrate the little wins along the way. Maybe one last kind of funny story. In my one of the things about being a principal investigator or running a group, I have a group of like 15 graduate students and postdocs, is that you kind of make the rules. So you can just like decide what you're going to do, and people be like, okay, that's fine. That's his prerogative. So I think one day I was like, I want to get a gong. And my students were like, why? I was like, so that we can celebrate these little wins every week. And now it's become like a linchpin of our lab's culture, where every week we just celebrate, hey, that data set looked really good. And it's funny because we have to explain it whenever someone comes in and they're like, why? Please translate this for me. But to me, it's that little stance of like, we're going to celebrate things, even the littlest thing to someone getting a job. And because we often don't, in academia, I can critique it from being inside of it. We don't stop enough to appreciate what we've already done. We're always like, on to the next thing. So that's my little stance against
Well, gratitude's important in all ways.
it. Is.
Yeah. So with that, thank you,
Of course.
for taking the time with me. And what tells me we have time for questions. So if you've got questions for Will, please go up to one of the two mics. Yeah, over there.
I am fluent in Spanish. Yes. I had to give that whole presentation in Spanish. I was sweating, but it went okay.
Science in Spanish is hard.
Science in Spanish is hard. Good question.
Hello,
Hello.
I'm Felicia, and I think you guys talked about it a little bit when you mentioned the struggles, but I was wondering, most of the scholars or people in here, they're very driven through high school, maybe college. Was there any points afterwards where you were making a decision, like, is this what I want to do, outside of the whole kitchen utensils fiasco, where you kind of had to, find your reason again, or pull forward from a setback?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were several times when I was a PhD student during my 5-year PhD where I thought, oh man, it's been 3 years and I have nothing to show for it. Or I've been working hard at this thing, but I don't know where I'm going. And I think sometimes my PhD mentor was helpful in that. But honestly, sometimes I had to find the answer off campus or outside of campus. Like I was at UC Berkeley, which is a fantastic place. But if I wasn't if I wasn't intentional, I could go like multiple days without seeing another Black person in my part of campus. And so what that meant is that so all that to say, it was isolating. It was isolating and hard, and together that is not a great combination. And so I think the things that like helped me kind of find my footing again were honestly my community outside of campus, whether that was my family or whether it was my friends, or honestly even just like looking back at some of the things my mentors had told me about, right? So someone gave me the advice. They were like, keep a folder on your computer that's like Smile File or something, where you're having a bad day and you just need to pick me up, and something just to remind me of how far I'd come already, and that taking another step forward, sometimes just like taking one more step forward was a win for the day, right? And so these are times in the middle of the PhD. I call it the tunnel of the PhD. Everyone has it at some point. And some of us have additional forces that are contributing to it. But I think maybe even more specifically, there was lots of times where people like question my abilities, I think I would say. And that's something that now I wouldn't say I've become used to, but I sense it and I have a low tolerance for it, right? But understandably so, I think. But at that time, when someone in authority over you is questioning your abilities, like in my qualifying exam, I think I learned to say like, oh, they're probably just playing devil's advocate. Let's play. Like, and that's how I would treat it. But one of my, not mentors, but someone on my committee who like loves to ask like antagonistic questions. The very technology that I just described to you that is like now award winning and now we're like putting in communities. He asked me like, isn't this just a cute way to, and then he said some more science words that aren't important, but he was basically just like saying nothing I did was that impressive. And I remind him about that now because I still know him. And I said, isn't that just a cute way to, win award? And so, but that to say, sometimes people will question your abilities. I think I leaned on other people to remind me who I was. I think that's what I kept coming back to. And now in more of a position of authority, and it still happens, right? People still like assume I'm not the professor in a group, or they assume that that I don't know what I'm doing or things like that. Now I'm in more of a position where I can say, oh, thanks for that feedback. I'm good. I know what I'm doing already. And it's not, I don't mean to be short. I just don't have patience for it now. And I don't think I need to have patience for it, but it's from those times where I was made to feel, or someone attempted to make me feel like I was not where I was, if that makes sense. Hopefully that helps.
Hi, Dr. Tarpeh. My name is Caleb Barrington Brown James. I'm a high school student in New York City, and I had a question regarding a lot of the causes of these pollutants in the water that you help with. So would you say that the majority of the causes of the pollutants are from things like farming techniques like use of fertilizer and like at least like things like eutrophication and stuff like that? Or would you say it's from other anthropogenic disturbances like the use of or littering and other things like that?
Yeah, good question. That's a great question from a high schooler, huh? If needed, thank you, Caleb. If needed, I can break some of that down for you. So fantastic question. I think much of the pollution that I deal with when it comes to water comes more from industry. So like from I don't know, like clothing factories or textile companies or semiconductor companies that have some pipe that leaves their factory and then goes into the environment. Those we call point sources because you can point to a pipe, right? You can say that's where it came from. Non-point sources, you can't quite point where it is. Those touch more on what you were getting at with like fertilizer runoff. And to me, those like, I try to always think that like anyone who's like causing pollution has like they are a rational person, right? So like a farmer is trying to make sure they make enough money and make enough crops, right? And so one of the best ways to do that is to over apply. You don't want to get to the end of the season and be like, man, if I had applied more fertilizer, my family could have eaten for more days, right? And so instead of like blaming the farmer in that case, I try to think about like knowing that fertilizer is going to run off into that water. How do I get it back? Right. And so that's how I try to close the loop. Some of it, sure, is littering, but I think most of the pollutants I work on is more because of like systems of how we do things, I would say.
Thank you. I actually just had an exam on exactly what you're talking about, like 36 hours ago. So
excellent. Kudos to your teacher. Kudos to you. Hope you got it right. Sounds like I bet you did based on you saying eutrophication. Thanks, Caleb.
Dr. Tarpeh.
Hello, Dr.
I'm
Norris.
incredibly proud of you. I remember when you were a college student and seeing just an incredible scientist and human being you are today is just amazing. You are a genius. And I'm just so touched to see you apply all that you've been gifted with to make such a huge impact on our world and help make the world a better place. I just want just to hear from you, what inspires you to just apply what you, and this is what the Ron Brown Scholar Program is about, right? We're service-minded, we're leaders, and we're here not to serve ourselves, but to serve others. What inspires you to do that with science and technology? How can you inspire others with that?
Yeah, fantastic question. And I was joking with Carmel earlier. She's such an inspiration to me. So like I think like she's in the original class of scholars, right? And so I just think so many of the scientists and engineers I know in this community, it comes from her, and that inspiration comes from her. So I just want to yeah, and to your question, I think it's so funny because as I like think back to the memories of like the interviews in this selection, like I remember whoever was interviewing me like kept pressing and kept asking me like, so how does that help people? How does that how does that? And I was like, I don't know. And I just felt like I hit a wall. I was like, I like science and I'm trying to help people. But they really pushed me on it. And I think something there, like I came back and I was like, it's still not. And that it was me at 17 trying to put it together and seeing there were still some gaps in it, right? But I think the things I remain most interested in and most inspired by is like the ingenuity and just like make it happenness of the communities I visit, right? Where there are micro enterprises and people just like make like the creativity of humans to make something out of nothing, I think has always inspired me. And that like, again, speaks to like, my own life and those who have come before me in my family. So I think there's, something that has always both bothered me and made me see the value of unlocking other people's potential. And so I think so much of what I think about, and this is like my take on sanitation, and when we look at stats about child mortality and things like that, I think, what if some of these people who are dying too young in their minds or in their trajectory would have been like the cure for cancer or something else so I think about what are we unlocking by giving people or like recognizing people's dignity and giving them a chance, like changing their chances. So that's what like in my mind gets me out of bed in the morning, both when it comes to like the students I teach and the students I mentor, and when it comes to like, what can this unlock for the next generations? I want to build something that lasts and that matters for a long time and that serves people. And so I think that's the like behind the scenes of how I think about things.
Thank you.
First off, I want to say thank you for your time, sir. It's been great hearing from you. But how do you go about graciously receiving such amazing compliments as being a genius, or all these titles and labels that people like to throw on to successful people, especially Black excellence? And it's just rightfully deserved. But like, how do you go about receiving that and doing it well without like boasting or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're a finalist, right? Remind me of your name.
I'm Zahir Covington.
Zahir. Okay, got it. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So the first thing that comes to mind is if I introduce you to my family, like my brother, my sister, and my mom, you would immediately get that they have. My sister loves to say, my older sister, she loves to say like, God made me to keep you humble, and she just loves this wonderful sister of mine. She just loves to rag on me. I made the mistake of telling my family I was writing I think I said, they were like, you didn't answer our calls this week or something like that. I was like, yeah, sorry, I was really busy writing this $3 million grant. And let me just tell you, they still haven't let that go. That was like 5 years ago. And I'll like call one of them and they like won't respond. They'll be like, I wasn't writing a $3 million grant or whatever. But so some of it is just my family keeps me humble, right? And they remember me as just like the nerdy kid who like couldn't do like some basic things, but could do some math things. I couldn't do some really very basic things. We don't need to go into that. But I learned and I'm more well-rounded now. Okay. But in more seriousness, I think there is tension in it. And I think Carmel brought this up too, because I think I never want to think of myself more highly than I think is worthwhile. But I also don't want to accept other people asserting that I'm lower than I am, if that makes it, that I'm not qualified or those sorts of things. And so it's a careful balance. I don't think I always do it right, but a mentor of mine much earlier in my life told me like humility is thinking of yourself accurately and honestly, right? And so I try to shoot for that. And so I think yeah, I just try to, that's what I try to shoot for. I think another thing I try to think about is I want the people closest to me, both in work and in my personal life, to think most highly of me, right? I think it's very easy to like do things for the masses out there, as it were, do things because you think it will be impressive, but at the expense of the people closest to you. So as a professor, that would mean like traveling around the world and presenting all this stuff, but not giving my graduate students who like actually do the work in the lab the credit, or not spending the time to actually mentor them and just like have them be like associated with my name or things like that. At a family level, it means like I spend a lot of time, try to spend a lot of time with my 2.5-year-old because that's what I want to be doing. And she's not going to remember me being here tonight or these other things, right? She's going to remember was daddy around, right? So those are some of the things I try to do. But I think it's so important to say both of those things because there may be plenty of people who try to knock you down a peg or try to assert themselves and like have you like quote unquote know your place, right? And so we don't want to think of ourselves lower than we are, and we don't want to agree with people when they question our credentials or our abilities, but we also don't want to be big-headed.
Yes. Thank you.
On that, I want to ask, how are you your own advocate?
Oh, that's a good question. How am I my own advocate? Yeah, I think sometimes I insist on things. I think in academia, some of it is like a lot of people, like when you win awards, right? Some of it is because someone nominated you, but like a secret behind that is sometimes people are asking people to nominate them. And so like, that's a thing I learned to do. It doesn't come, that's not intuitive to me to do. It seems kind of weird actually, but it's a thing I've done to advocate for myself because I know that matters for like me getting tenure and these things and my students getting jobs. And so I guess I've started to advocate for myself in some of those ways. And I think other ways I've hinted at them have just been like insisting on belonging, insisting on my value, insisting on my qualifications. Because I think there have been lots of times where people question like, oh, did Will only get that job at Stanford because he was Black? And it's like, no, there were 400 people who applied and my colleagues decided I was the best one, right? Like that's. And so I think some of that is just like saying out loud the things, or one of my favorite things to say when someone says something strange like that is like, what do you mean by that? It cracks me up every time, but I just insist on them saying it out loud, right?
Yeah,
if we're gonna go there, let's say it aloud. So I think some of that is just, again, I think it just comes from like, because people who I loved and cherished told me who I was, I can insist on that. Like I know there are parts of my job that I'm good at. You don't need an award to tell you that. I know I excel in some of these things, and so I can lean into those and trust my instincts, and know that there are other parts that I'm still growing on. But I think I just like insist that I belong. If it's being questioned, I just insist.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. If you want to hear more inspiring conversations like this one, don't forget to click subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. To learn more about the organization, check us out at ronbrown.org.